Good afternoon, and welcome to the fifth and final in a series of the Healthcare Business Intelligence Success, How to Manage Cultural Implications of BI Deployments. My name is Laura Madsen, and I am the BI Evangelist and Healthcare Services Lead here at Lancet. And I am happy to have you join me today on this, what happens to be a very sunny Friday in Minnesota. So, as I mentioned, this is the fifth in the series of Healthcare Business Intelligence Successes. These webinars were based on the book Healthcare Business Intelligence.
Unmuted.
And this final webinar is about cultural implications, the fifth tenet in the book. So I do think that all of the tenets are equally important. Some of them play an important factor depending on where you're at in your maturity or the deployment or the rollout, that kind of a thing. Some things become more important than others. I've talked an awful lot about data quality and data governance, which I do believe are keys to a successful deployment of really any business intelligence program, but in particular healthcare. We don't adopt data very well if we don't think that it's of high quality. So, that's one way in one tenet that I do think is incredibly important. But the more and more I do this, the more I realize that the cultural implications and the way our organizations are structured and the ways that they support these activities is just as important in our ability to successfully release BI programs. And I've seen this play out in many, many different ways, and that's really what we're going to talk about today in all of these different ways and how they play out. And our agenda for today. So the first thing is we're going to talk a little bit about the cultural implications and what are they? What does that really mean? Then we're going to talk about why it matters because, for a long time maybe we didn't think it mattered. We're going to talk a little bit about the cultural aspects of business intelligence, how to manage expectations, both the good ones and the bad ones. And then we're going to go through some scenarios of how to navigate some of these difficult situations. Okay. So let's talk about the BI ecosystem. And I do think that I've presented this slide in other webinars. I think this is really critically important because the fact of the matter is when we look at our organizations and we're talking about releasing business intelligence capabilities, so data, reporting, dashboards, enhanced data visualizations, what we have to recognize is that we're releasing this content out into a very complex ecosystem. And in a lot of cases, there's aspects of that ecosystem that may or may not be supportive and may or may not be destructive to the level of activity that we're trying to release. So when we think about our ecosystem, our own ecosystem, right, we all know from our fourth grade biology class how these things work. And they have to be sort of in equilibrium in order to have a good function, right? You can't have too much sun without enough water because then you have drought, or too much water and not enough sun, it gives you flooding, etc., etc. And if we don't really sort of think about releasing these BI capabilities into an ecosystem and the influx and the change that could be precipitated as a result of that in the ecosystem, our odds of success are much less likely to occur. So that's really when we think about why politics matter and why the ecosystem matters, why cultural implications matter. There's a number of instances where I have had experiences where the organization told me, we really want BI. We're going to put time and effort and money and everything into this business intelligence activity. And there was some support, but maybe not at the leadership level. And we released the content and nothing happened. It was quite literally, it went out into the system, into the ether, and nothing changed. The organization didn't respond to the data. There was no fundamental change or shift that occurred. We didn't achieve our goal of going from decision making by gut to decision making by data. And that has a lot to do with this idea that we have to manage all of the different levels of activity that occur within our own organization. There has to be just enough customers, and we have to be able to manage our executives and their expectations. We have to govern that data so that it takes advantage of all of the value that it can, but it doesn't go overboard and completely overwhelm overwhelm our organization. So that's really what I mean when I'm talking about cultural implications and the importance of them. So a couple of years ago, I think this was just maybe 2 years ago now, Gartner did a presentation. I can't even remember which analyst it was, but they really advised that these BI programs need to be treated as cultural transformations of the business. And historically, we've treated BI as IT projects, right? Because it's data and it's servers and it's hardware and it's software and all of these things. So we made it the responsibility of IT and sort of put it off into the corner. And the fact of the matter is, if we don't consider the broader organization and treat it really as a transformation project, you're likely going to have the same experience we just talked about with releasing it into an ecosystem and nothing sort of happens. So even Gartner is joining that bus. So let's talk about how hospitals or healthcare is different from a cultural perspective. I've spent 15 years in healthcare. I've had a little bit of exposure outside of healthcare into peeks into other organizations and how they function. But one thing I've heard over and over and over again, and I've witnessed personally, is that hospital culture was really created as decision-making by consensus. So these hospitals were created, and there were physicians and administrators, and some of them were physician-run, but they would always have a number of people at the table, the nurses, the doctors, the administrators, to come up with decisions as how to guide the organization, the hospital, in moving forward. And that approach, that consensus by decision, or decision-making by consensus, has been really pervasive across healthcare. So we have all these cogs that are moving along, right? And one cog, which is these committees that we create to make the decisions that we feel are important, can slow or break or snap, and then the whole ecosystem sort of shifts itself around that one slow or broken cog. And this has been completely pervasive, not just in hospitals, but throughout healthcare organizations. And it's not bad. We just have to recognize that is how these organizations work, how our organizations work, and work within the constraints that presents us. One of the challenges when we talk about the evolution of BI in healthcare as a result of sort of this decision-making by consensus is this idea that we have these strong fiefdoms, right? These silos of data and data ownership where people are sort of slapping you away saying, no, don't touch my data. And though in a lot of ways for many, many years, those silos of data, those fiefdoms, were respected. Like, oh yeah, finance is data. We don't need to worry about that. And the fact of the matter is in our brave new world, as overused as that term is, of healthcare, integration is the key point. We really need to look at our organizations from a financial perspective, an operational perspective, and a clinical perspective, a whole 360-degree view in order for us to be successful. So we really have to break through those silos and deconstruct those fiefdoms in order for our BI programs to be successful. So how do we work within the constraints of this hospital culture and these aspects of this hospital culture while still sort of moving forward with a BI effort? And I've been doing a fair amount of research on this idea of how you drive change throughout organizations, not just healthcare, but organizations in general. And I thought it was very interesting. One of the things that I read was talking about how you present the problem, and the recommendation really is to not present the problem as it exists today, but to repaint the picture of how you want it to exist in the future. And although we have some of these barriers associated with cultural implications and whether or not our organizations are ready to adopt, the fact of the matter is we're already past that point. So it's been a year since I wrote the book, or a year since it's been published, and so much has already changed since I wrote the book, right? We are past the point where whether or not we've made a decision to use data and information to drive our organizations. We have to use data and information to drive our organizations. The question is, how are we going to do that? How can we successfully do that? Because we don't have a lot of time to evolve these activities in order to compete in our changed marketplace. So what we have to do is create a vision or a picture of what the future should look like, and allow our culture to sort of come to that perspective. Now, I think it's important to note that that does not mean build it and they will come, right? These pictures or visions of the future should really reflect what the organization is already striving for. We will be an ACO, or we will participate in ACO. We will use EHRs across the organization for improved, efficiency. We will adopt patient-centered medical home. All of these things. That's what I mean by painting a picture. And when we talk about painting a picture with the data, we'll talk about this idea that we will become data-driven organizations. We will use data to make improved decisions. And that sort of starts to set the stage and you start to have a different conversation about the cultural aspect of the organization when we all know what the future will look like. So that sounds really fun and maybe not fun, but that sounds relatively straightforward, but the fact of the matter is it's really not. There are some steps, some pragmatic steps that we can take. The first is, I've said this before, I'll say it again, I'll probably say it a lot over the next 10 years, as I've said it a lot for the last 15 years. The business side must lead the business intelligence project program effort. It is business intelligence, right? And the idea or the stronghold of data being IT's problem is no longer true. And it's not that IT doesn't have a team full of experienced and committed individuals, but there is a group of people on the opposite side of the hall, so to speak, that are aligned closer to what the business is aiming for, and that's because they're in the business. It's just an alignment issue. So it does not mean that IT is not part of the solution. Of course they are, but the business side must lead the BI efforts. The other thing that's really important, and I still don't see this happening across the country in healthcare organizations, but we must transform our organizations to be information consumers with enough of the knowledge and passion to not only request the right data, but know what the right data is. And I get this question a lot. I don't want to, I don't want to do self-service BI because our users are dumb. And the fact of the matter is your users are actually not dumb. They're quite bright. The challenge that we have is that those users are not used to using data to make decisions. And we need to be able to, number one, teach them some of these key pieces of information that will help them and make them more comfortable with data. But we also have to present the data in a way that makes it easier for them to understand it. And that's where data visualization has really changed business intelligence over the last really 5 to 10 years. And that's a really big order, right? I mean, that's asking a lot, particularly when you're already sort of heads down trying to deliver a BI program or capabilities out. But I think that these are important steps. And one of the first ways that you can really take advantage of something like this, try to figure out where you're at, is to assess your organization's readiness for change. And if you have the book, Healthcare Business Intelligence, in the book there is an assessment that you can take that will allow you to assess how prepared your organization is to really take on this enterprise level change. And that's very important because when you look at your organization's preparedness against your business intelligence maturity level, which is also listed there, you start to get a picture of the things that you can do in stepwise order to make sure that your organization not only is ready, but that when they are ready, you're also ready from a BI perspective. So, these are things like training your end users to understand data and information better. Do a Business Stats 101 class. That's really useful. Don't assume that people know how to do this. A number of years ago, probably 3 years ago, there was an article written that talked about the fact that even though All you hear about now is data and big data and trending data. Most of the business courses that people are graduating from still don't even have one class that teaches people how to consume statistics. So there are ways that you can give people the tools that they need in order to help with this cultural shift that has to occur in your organizations. One of the biggest, most important, and painful parts of releasing business intelligence capabilities is managing expectations associated with the activity. I really can't underestimate this enough. It's one of the things that I have this conversation all the time with people. How do we manage expectations? I need to be able to manage expectations. I'm worried about the expectations. And in most cases, people are right to be worried. There's a fair amount of pent-up demand. We all have plenty of data now, so that's not the problem. But the problem is getting our arms around what that means for the organization and releasing that out in an appropriate way. And a lot of the impact of sort of this cultural implications, your organization's preparedness, and whether or not they're ready to accept it, is how much and in what way you communicate out what it is, how it impacts them, and when they're going to get it. So here's a way to think about this, and I've talked about this in the past. One of the things you need to do is to schedule these activities. But the fact of the matter is, I've seen this happen before, where people will schedule the activities, but then they get so busy and their implementation really ramps up, and then everything gets distracted. So not only do you have to schedule it, but I really do recommend that you have one person that is responsible essentially for doing this work of communicating this out. So you need to be broadcasting, much like this scenario where we're doing a webinar, but pre-record these webinars, and then you can push them out and people can listen to them at their leisure and have very tangible content that they can see that you will be releasing, and time frames in which you're comfortable in representing. And just make sure that that's out there and available for people to access that whenever they want. Believe it or not, email is communication. And a lot of people use their email and they use it almost like a content management system, right? I have emails from 4 years ago, and I will go back and refer to those emails. And so you can push emails out and don't expect somebody to always respond right away, but the fact that the information is there and they have the opportunity to go back and take a look at it in the future may be really beneficial, and it is a method of communication. It cannot be the only method of communication. Think about newsletters or any other way that you can present to a very broad audience what business intelligence is and what's happening. Because the more that you increase awareness about it, the less likely you're going to have barriers about it, if you will, when you go live. And then finally, this idea of sort of these virtual meetings or conferences, have a webcam and run some live meetings and demo the content, because this really is about showing people what is possible, what you have, what you can do, and what they will get and when. Because again, it's just about making sure that you are controlling the conversation around what is going to happen versus the other way around, which is somebody controlling the conversation about what's not happening. And we have to keep in mind that another method of communication that isn't as positive is this idea of rumors and the rumor mill, if you will. And I know for myself, I have been in situations where I maybe haven't communicated as well as I should have. I got really busy and I didn't feel like communication was the most important thing when I had, serious issues around how to present the data or how to get the data out. And pretty soon I heard, rumors around the BI program wasn't doing that well and probably wasn't going to happen, or things weren't going to get released. And these rumors started to really prevent people. All of a sudden, people would stop showing up to my meetings because they thought, well, BI is not going to work anyway. So then I had, a decreased amount of participation. And that's a very interesting aspect of communication and cultural implications that can occur. And, it's unfortunate, but it's true in that when we have fiefdoms or silos of data, there are people that are attached to those that in some cases have strongholds, and they really will do a fair amount to try to prevent you from getting access to that data. And in some cases that means being a barrier essentially to the success by talking, starting rumors or gossip about what is or is not happening. So the fact of the matter is, if you can get out there and push that communication out as much as possible, you're in control of the conversations and the rumors aren't coming in the opposite way. So let's talk a little bit about spin control and what you can do when things go bad, which, it happens, right? It's not the perfect world. I remember a couple of years ago there was a bad release of a BI system that I was working on, and we were trying to do some customization, and the customization wasn't working very well. And the fact of the matter was we actually came a little bit late to the customization realization, so we did an initial release and nobody liked it, but it took us a long time to customize it because there were some technical challenges associated with that. And so by the time that we got the customization out, the customization that the users had wanted, they had readjusted their behavior so that the customization wasn't that important. So either they had gotten used to the way it was, or they just didn't adapt. And that was a real challenge for us. It was a challenge that ended up sort of lasting for the entire length of the program, and it was attached to the software, right? It's what people generally attach things to, is even if it's the data that's the issue, people experience it through the software, so that must mean that it's bad software. Most of the time it wasn't. So the biggest thing here is what I did was I went out to the group and I said, geez, mea culpa, and really tried to get the communication engine back. And I tried to be as forthright and honest as possible, but I also didn't want to inundate them with a level of technical detail that wasn't going to be helpful to them. What I wanted to share and express to them was there were challenges and there were steps being taken to get around those challenges. And that's probably the best that you can do in a situation where the technical challenges will sort of strap you from having control over dates. For example, we may have best case scenario dates in our heads, but there are times when the technical difficulties will prevent you from releasing in 6 weeks because you may not even know where the depth of the issue is for 6 weeks. So the more that you can communicate and get that information out there, the better it is. But the truth is that that's just a really tough situation to manage. Another sort of example, I worked with a client a couple of years ago, and they brought me in, and they had for years a very successful BI program that had been chugging along. They had one of the leaders of the BI program left, and as soon as that happened, the program sort of went into limbo. There wasn't, a lot of content wasn't being released because they didn't hire a new person to take over for that gentleman's departure. And what they did release was sort of the easy stuff, right, that nobody really needed or wanted. And so eventually BI became less, almost like on automatic pilot, and people just started moving around it. And so they were getting data from other places, creating these ginormous Excel sheets to do what they needed to do. And so a new BI leader was hired a couple of years later, and it was just sort of a mess, and they weren't really sure what to do. And that was a real challenge because they had for years had really good ownership and stewardship, and they had all the right technical and architecture pieces in place. They lost a leader, and they didn't have a lot of executive support after that. So you have to rebuild up the interest and the support for business intelligence, and that starts with sort of an executive level support, hiring that leader back. And then in this case, communication isn't going to help you other than I'm here and things are changing. You got to put your head down and get the work done. And that's true for anything, right? You can't just talk your way out of it. You really do need to get your work done. But all of these things can be thought about in the context of your organization's readiness and willingness to accept business intelligence capabilities, or their preparedness to change from an enterprise perspective. And so that goes back to sort of that preparedness to change. So, there's been an awful lot of talk, and there's been a lot of changes in data warehousing and business intelligence in the last couple of years. It is following the trend of IT as far as the innovation cycle is shortening, and so we're able to take something that seems rather trendy and it works its way through the maturity cycle really quickly. And I see that all the time. And the one thing that I think healthcare in particular is searching for right now is an easy button. And I say this because we have so much going on. We have all these changes that are happening, these external market pressures that are occurring, all of these data that we've not really had to manage in the past, and we are looking outside of our organizations with this idea that there must be something that somebody else built that I can buy, plug in, turn on, and then I can move on with my day. And in some ways that may be true. There may be a product out there that will get you really close. What I really want organizations to think about as they start down that path, and obviously nobody's going to be like, oh, well, I'm looking for the easy button. But you start to have conversations of, well, should we buy it or should we build it? All I ask is, as we're thinking about this, think about all of the implications associated with a software purchase, because there's no such thing as an easy button. And even though from a cultural perspective it feels like that's what we need to do in order to move ourselves off the dime, all you're really doing is, the term is kicking the can down the street. Eventually you will have to pay the price. And so, if you can take a step back and think about your organization and how it does its work, and align yourself to paying the price when it makes the most sense to you, sometimes that means buying a product to get your organization off the dime. Other times it means that you just have to stop and think for a minute and start to be planful about what it means to integrate data and what it means to create architecture that will be scalable and flexible and reliable over time, what it means to visualize data out to a broader end user base, how to govern that data, how to sponsor the program, how to lead the program. All of these things you cannot skip. So just buying a product isn't going to help you, and in the long run may actually, from a cultural implications perspective, sort of come back to bite you, because there's going to be a lot of hoopla around it. People are going to hear about it. You're going to buy it, and then you're going to go into this cave of implementation, and sometimes that takes 2 months, sometimes it takes 12 months, and as you're having these cultural discussions or not, people are going to fill in that blank, and so I just encourage everyone to understand that there is a lot of new trendy things, and particularly in healthcare data and healthcare IT right now. Lots of new products out there, and sometimes that'll make your life easier and sometimes it won't, and we just need to walk in with eyes wide open, because there is an aspect of that is not only driven by our culture, but we'll pay the price from our culture. I hope that made sense. So really, when we talk about impacting the culture of our organization, there's two aspects to that. Number one, how can we work within the culture to be the most successful? But then number two, when we think about the sort of the backlash from the culture, how can we prevent that, or if it does happen, how can we not prevent it, but make it less impactful in the long run? And those are two sort of different ways of thinking about it. I think we talked about how to address it if it happens, and how to address those things. We have to get communication out there, and really we have to just do the work and put our heads down and release valuable content, value being the key word there. But when we start to think about creating an organization that does not fear data but encompasses it and is excited about it, we really have to breed an organization that's incented to innovate through data and not to fear failure, and really to question everything. And in most healthcare organizations that I work with, you have a team of people somewhere that do this naturally, right? They innovate, they bring in data, they start to analyze it, they find a model, and then they move on and do that same thing again. And they don't necessarily fear failure. They'll spend a couple days working on something, then they'll realize it doesn't apply, and then they'll start over and try again. And when you create this level of participation in an organization, the backlash of the culture, that idea of decision by consensus and slowing it down, becomes less impacted because you have people throughout the organization that are innovating through data, and they're not going to fear failure, right? They're going to go ahead and of course the term is fail early and fail often. So they're doing that, right? And then they question everything, not because they're trying to be difficult, but because they want to make sure that they understand it and understand the ramifications that it has to the entire organization. So if you can breed that level of curiosity into your organizations, then you're going to be really, you're going to be at the tip of the hill pushing that snowball down, and it'll be a much easier thing to manage from a cultural implications perspective. So a couple of things that we talked about doing is, you can do a business stats 101 class, very simple, basic. How do you look at stats? What are the data points that drive our organization? I don't think you should assume that everybody knows the 10 or 15 data points that drives the organization. I think that should be explained to everybody, and where they can find it, and offer up a webinar or something like that that's pre-recorded, so that people can go through refreshers, because we generally release that content maybe once a month, maybe once a quarter, and people are going to forget in between time. I'd also offer up a class on data visualization and how your organization visualizes data and the best practices that your organization follows. And this is in addition to all your standard BI training on the product itself. And as part of these activities, I would still take that assessment, even though all of our organizations in healthcare really have agreed that information or data is the future for healthcare. I still think that knowing your organization's readiness to change could really enlighten you and your path to releasing business intelligence capabilities over time. And that is today's webinar. I'm going to keep it short and sweet for a Friday afternoon. And I thank you for your time today. And there is my contact information. Oh boy, here we go with the pop-up boxes again. And if you have any questions or concerns about today's content or any of the webinars is part of the webinar series that we did on healthcare business intelligence success, you can contact me at lmadsen@lancetsoftware.com. There's my phone number. I do Twitter once in a while. I have to warn you that every once in a while I will post a picture of my child doing something insanely cute. But for the most part, it is all work related. And then I'd also like to draw your attention to the Healthcare Business Intelligence Summit in its 5th year on September 19th in beautiful Minneapolis, Minnesota. This year we have 2 tracks, the Volume to Value track and the Barriers to Business Intelligence Success, as well as 2 workshops this year on how to create an analytic organization. And you can find out more information at www.healthcarebisummit.com. Thank you for your participation today, and enjoy your Friday.